Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Sethurst in Los Angeles.
And I'm Alison Norrington in London, and welcome to the Story Hour.
The Story Hour sits at the intersection of storytelling and technology. We bring you the story behind the stories, how it's written, how it's produced, how it's distributed, and even the personal stories behind the storytellers themselves.
We talk with the master writers, producers, directors, authors, and technologists covering it all, from film and television to literature, virtual and augmented reality, and more, as well as the innovations in production, technology, and distribution that are changing the how of storytelling.
Since becoming a Huffington Post blogger in 2015, Bryan Behar has written about a variety of fun topics, including suicide, depression, aging, overeating, and getting trapped in his own wetsuit. I think we'll have to ask if that's a metaphor. In his day job, Bryan is a longtime writer producer of American sitcoms, along with his former writing partner. Bryan has written for 21 shows in the past 25 years, including Wilfred, Andy Richter Controls the Universe, The New Adventures of Old Kristine, 8 Simple Rules, Last Man Standing, Ned and Stacey, and a few that even he cannot remember.
He was the exec producer showrunner of the final 2 seasons on the Netflix Full House reboot, Fuller House. Additionally, he's sold numerous comedy pilots to ABC, Fox, Disney, and USA. With 197,000 Twitter followers, Bryan's tweets have been everywhere, from Entertainment Weekly to At Midnight, not to mention being inadvertently retweeted by Ted Cruz while slamming Ted Cruz. Prior to his TV career, Bryan was a Clio award-winning copywriter at ad agencies up and down the West Coast. Bryan is a graduate of Brown University, a school he's well aware he would not have gotten into if applying today. Excited to talk to and welcome self-professed TV writer and emotional eater, the lovely Bryan Behar.
Hello, Bryan, and welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for that introduction. You made me sound far more impressive than I feel, but I am thrilled to be here with you guys. This is wonderful.
You know, you are actually, we've had showrunners on, but not from comedy. We've had from drama. So you're our first funny person.
Okay, there's no pressure at all. But I am thrilled to be here. Lovely to have some structure to my day, an excuse to put on pants and to have my weekly shower. So this is fantastic.
Bryan, you could have done this pantsless because we can only see up to here.
Yes, there is. I cannot say with absolute moral certainty that I'm not, but you will just have to. Your viewership will just have to trust that there are pants.
Well, and not to worry, if something happens, we'll just fix it in post. So I'm going to let Alison get us started.
Please. Hi, Alison.
Hey, Bryan, you've worked on some amazing shows, and I'm just wondering, where did this all begin for you? As a kid, did you dream of being a writer? What was you thinking? Was that your goal?
I was always obsessed with sitcoms as a child. I can remember even back to being 4 years old, living at our house in Van Nuys. I had no connection to, even growing up in LA, I had no connection to Hollywood in any way. But I would wait all week for the Brady Bunch to come on Friday nights. This is even before it was syndicated. And even then, I knew there was something just incredibly soothing and comforting about sitcoms. I was obsessed with them from a young age. That said, I never thought I was funny. I didn't know I could be a writer. I went to college assuming that I would become an attorney like everyone else I knew. And as I started to write for my college paper at Brown University, for the Brown Daily Herald. I had a column for 3 years, and people started to say, "Hey, you're really funny." And I was like, no one was more surprised by that than my parents, but I think I was almost equally surprised to hear it. And I started to realize that I think that writing felt more and more like an appropriate journey for me. I didn't think I could be a TV writer. I wanted to be. So and advertising felt like it was a more doable path right out of college. So I pursued that, and I was a copywriter for 7 years out of college, but all the while thinking that I wanted to be a sitcom writer, that was my ultimate dream. And even as I got some success in advertising, I just kept trying to write scripts on the side, and I really couldn't shake the dream that I had of working in TV. So I finally just ditched a career that had been working for me, and moved back to LA and gave it a shot. And within about a month or two, I was on my first show, which I know is not common, but it was an overnight success. But after 7 years of intense struggle and self-loathing, so it was both meteoric and and a long time coming.
Right.
I wanted to ask you in the training, because I've heard this before. So there's a great scene, and I actually think we've talked about it in the Dick Van Dyke Show. In the episode was The Curious Thing About Women, with the inflatable raft that Laura can't help but open. And the three writers are actually sitting in the writer's room. That was the day when there were probably only three writers on a television show in a writer's room. And they're working it out. And it's so amazing how they work it out. And I've heard so many writers say that was a seminal moment for them in terms of them becoming a writer. Was there a seminal moment for you in terms of sitcom and saying, that's amazing? That's even looking in hindsight.
That's a fantastic question. I think the one thing that I can sort of pinpoint, even in retrospect, and it may not be a popular thing to say for reasons you'll soon understand, but seeing Annie Hall for me was sort of the first time where I watched a piece of art and felt like, there's a part of my life reflected in that. Like, there's someone who's being paid generously to write from like a Jewish American male perspective. And I was seeing, depictions of like versions of my family on screen, and then from there you start to, go and discover Philip Roth in fiction. And there were, lots of television depictions of sort of coming from a Jewish American voice. And from Woody Allen, I then discovered Albert Brooks and Mel Brooks and Jim Brooks, all the Brookses, and who else? Then I went back and started studying Billy Wilder and Preston Sturges and Ernest Lubitsch, and all sort of the comic greats that informed Woody Allen. So it all sort of stemmed from that, from sort of hearing a voice that I didn't know was a distinct voice until I saw that movie, and then from there that's all I wanted to do.
I just have a question. PBS did a special, and I cannot remember the name of it, where they literally tracked the influence of Jewish writers and Jewish performers in the entertainment industry in America. Did you get to see that?
I'm sure I did. I don't think I ever miss anything that has the words Jewish American in the title, but I did see that, and it's a very common. I mean, I think you will hear a lot, especially when you talk to comedy writers, but probably all writers, and certainly from any immigrant background or any ethnicity, your way in is probably to see that very first depiction of someone who looks and feels like you.
Which is such an issue right now about people being able to see themselves in
Absolutely.
representation. Before we move on to that subject, I want to tell you a funny story, which I think will make you laugh. Herschel Bernardi. Do you remember Herschel Bernardi?
I would like to say
he starred in Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway.
Okay.
But he also had his own sitcom called Arnie.
But yes, go ahead.
Okay. So he asked his daughter, an 8-year-old Robin Bernardi, seriously, he said to her, "Do you know what it means to be Jewish?" And her answer was, "Well, I'm funny." I have a feeling you and Robin would get along very well.
I would hope so. I would like to believe that. I'll answer that two ways. Number one, I would like to believe that my being Jewish in some way informs my comedy. I always see myself, no matter how long I've been in this country, and it's been all 55 of my years, I always see myself as an outsider. I don't think that has ever changed. But I also think that I think everyone sort of, it's no longer the Jewishness per se that makes me funny. I think it's the sort of the specificity from which anyone comes into comedy. As long as you're coming from a place of, a place of candor, a place of specific voice and place and tone. I don't know that someone who is Indian or Latinx or Black or LGBTQ or a woman, I don't think they would say that they are any less funny if they're not Jewish. I would say that they would think they are funny because they have a unique voice and they have unique stories to tell that only they can tell. And would say that there is not a long, rich tradition in our business, dating back, to vaudeville of Jews being well represented in comedy. And I do think that comes from dates all the way back to their sort of outsider immigrant status. And obviously that is less the case now, but I do think that some of the voice and the worldview, the view that the world is out to get them and that they are either a schlemiel or a schlemazel, is going to be the, yes, you want me to define that?
Yes, please define schlemiel and schlemazel, even for those fans of Laverne and Shirley's theme song.
Even for those. Obviously, that's the first place I heard it. But the first time I heard it defined, and again, this is not a pure definition, but it is sort of a situational definition. I heard Jerry Seinfeld describe it in a way that it made a perfect sense to me. He said, it was basically that he was a schlemiel and George is a schlemazel. A schlemiel is a guy who spills soup, and a schlemazel is a guy who has soup spilled on him. Both are still distinctly Jewish comic tropes, but there is a distinction. There is a difference between the guy who goes through the world having things dumped on their own lap, and that is different. That is different than a guy who spills. Neither are great. Neither's the strapping Gentile lead, but both are a type, and there is a delineation that I understand, at least from the way he described it.
But you could surely be both, right? You wear a different hat on a different day, right?
Oh, no, yes. No, there is no doubt that I am both, that I have been both, and it really is just a matter of what kind of soup and what day. But yeah, but I think that I still think that most Jewish writers, and really most people who go into comedy, feel that way about themselves deep down. I've always said that nobody goes into comedy writing or stand-up comedy because their relationship with their mother was too good or they were too popular on the schoolyard. Right. You don't go. I still believe this to this day. You don't go into comedy by choice. You go into comedy because you have to, because you need something to process the pain. And here I am, 25 years later, still.
You said as well about still feeling like an outsider, right?
Yes.
I suppose on the one hand that to some extent the comedy writing, and I know you said it with a joking tone about easing the pain or whatever, but there's an outlet, right? It's an outlet to be able to, if you feel like an outsider, but also there's a freedom to feeling like an outsider. Because if you don't fit in anyway, then you've got nothing to lose. Is there something?
I guess so, but it's taken about 55 years to get to that freedom. When you're, a little kid on a schoolyard, who's perhaps better at school than you are at sports, that's not necessarily an awareness that you carry with you.
Of course.
Secondly, if you have critical parents, you're not like, yes, they're critical, but they are inculcating in me a comic point of view and a view of the world that, of self-flagellation that's going to pay dividends later on. So, I like to believe that I've sort of grown into my skin and have begun to enjoy the persona that I have. But I think growing up, it's more of it's a weapon or a shield or a defense mechanism in which you learn to be funny to protect yourself, because if you can't necessarily protect yourself with your fists, a witty barb is probably the next best thing. And that's sort of how it came about for me. I didn't even know I was being funny. I was just trying to protect myself at an all boys Episcopalian school. So, I did the best I could, and I'm
talk about your outsider status.
Yeah, no, I can't say that was exactly the right choice, but it was the choice that was made for me. So I did the best I could to adapt and survive, and it was a little more survive than adapt. But I'm glad it's over, and I didn't send my kids there. So there you have it. That's one of the beauties of being a parent is you don't necessarily have to recreate the traumas of your own childhood.
So Brian, every Thursday evening, at least in Pacific time, yes, you and a guy you went to high school with, Bradley.
Yes.
You conduct a room on Clubhouse, which I would recommend for anyone to attend because it is just so authentically funny. And I
thank you. That's really, really kind of you.
I've had like a string of bad days, as many people have. But on those times, I literally just put it in. I feel no need to participate or ask to speak, but I just laughed myself. And it is such a relief when you talk about comic relief. It's such a relief that even in the midst of stuff where we have to be concerned with a pandemic and representation and all of these things that are happening around us, that there are these islands where people are just free to be who they are. And your room is very diverse. But there is this authenticity about you, and I don't want to make you blush.
No, I am.
And this complete honesty in dealing about life. And when we had our brief time where we were preparing for our interview, we asked you about the changes in the last year. And you went, instead of talking about the industry, you talked about your own personal change. I would love for you to talk a little about that because so many people have gone through changes and priorities and seen things as ending as opposed to seeing new beginnings. And it seemed to me that, and I'll let you speak to this, but it seemed to me from devastation, which no one gets through life unscathed, but there's something about the way you turned something and looked at it, even with your own sense of humor and sometimes self-deprecating sense of humor, were able to look at what your next opportunity was. Can you talk a little bit about the last year and the effect that it has had on you as a writer and creator?
I'd be happy to. I might have to stop in the middle and go take another hit of Lexapro and then a third Xanax. But I'm happy to talk about the last year. There's no question that it's been tough for so many of us. So I don't want to, ascribe to myself any awards for martyrdom. But it has not been a good year, and I can even go beyond that. I haven't worked in a year and a half. So my last job was the showrunner, executive producer on Fuller House, the Full House reboot on Netflix. And I ran that show with my former partner for the final 2 seasons. And here I was getting this enormous break at 53. This was the 21st show I had been on. I'd been doing this for 23 years at the time. I was 53 years old, and I got my first show running job. And, against a lot of obstacles that I'm not going to get into, like internally, like we really did a fantastic job. And I'm not one who is self-aggrandizing at all. I think you've probably seen that I'm far more prone to self-flagellation and self-deprecation. So like for me to say that I did a good job, I must have done a really good job. And I thought I would take a couple weeks off, and then, we would go back and run another show, because that's what we do now. And it's now been about 18 months. And in addition to that, I had a split with my partner of 25 years, and who had been my best friend for 35 years. And that's like deeply saddening to me. It was not something that I expected. Either as a result of that or in concert with that, I lost my representation at UTA, where I had also been for the past 25 years. I'd only had one partner and one agent. And so suddenly, I wasn't just home in a pandemic at a time when there were far fewer jobs in Hollywood because so much of production had shut down for health reasons. None of the pilots that they were going to shoot last year had been shot for pandemic reasons, but as a result, that meant there were significantly fewer shows that I could be staffed on. And beyond that, I was forced now to try writing on my own, in my own voice, for the first time at 55. And I was forced to find representation, with people who didn't know me from back when, but I had to suddenly impress them with all new pieces of material, because nothing that I had written with my partner was germ the discussion anymore. As far as the business sees me, like you need all new pieces of material. So, there is no question that I've gone through bouts of sort of deep melancholy over this past year. But the flip side is I have written 2 sitcom pilots on my own. I just finished my first drama pilot and turned it in 2 days ago because I'm trying to open up all sorts of avenues and possibilities in terms of staffing. I'm not trying to be pigeonholed into any one area. I want to open up any and all avenues that might want me. And I wrote my first novel all during this time, which...
Were you surprised that, because one, you have an identity, it's almost like a marriage ending. You're part of a dyad, and then your whole identity is that dyad, and then you're not. And then you have to figure out who you are without that relationship. Were you surprised at the discovery of your own ability to write on your own and find your own voice?
Absolutely. There is no question. But let me dissect that just a little. On the one hand, the business sees me only as part of that dyad. They don't know me as anyone other than the team of Bryan and Steve, and they don't know whether Bryan wrote the joke they liked or Steve wrote the joke they liked. So they always assume it was the other guy unless proven otherwise. So that's something I really have to overcome, and we'll see if I do. That's number one. But number two is even prior to this year, I've been on a bit of a journey, and I hate to say journey because it makes it sound like I'm the Bachelor, but I've been on a bit of a journey of sort of self-discovery and finding my own voice that dates back for about 4 or 5 years, and that includes I was like one of the very final people to join Facebook on the planet, I think. When they had the movie and it was like, 1 billion people have joined, and I'm like, I'm not even one of them yet, because I was too terrified of writing or speaking in my own voice. But that got me onto Twitter. And I'm now, as I think you mentioned earlier, I'm now up to 192,000 followers, which if you knew me in elementary school when no one spoke to me, you would be stunned that I have amassed a following of any kind. including my immediate family. Based on that, I literally was discovered. This was my Schwab's pharmacy moment. I was literally discovered on Twitter by the Huffington Post. Someone said, "Hey, we like what you're tweeting. Do you have anything that you might be interested in writing?" And they had no idea what I would write, or I think they thought it was just going to be some more jokes. And I ended up writing a piece about my father's suicide that took place in 2008, and I had never written about and never spoken about publicly. And that got shared like 10,000 times. And I've never replicated that success. But based on that, I've written between Huffington Post and Medium over 60 pieces in the last 5 years on a range of topics that you would not normally have expected from me or from a sitcom writer in general. And I think like you mentioned at the outset, they range in everything from suicide and depression to aging to ageism, to overeating, to just sort of all the vicissitudes of growing up and growing older. And all of that has really been a tremendous boon to me in terms of finding my own voice, in terms of recognizing that I didn't need a partner to say everything. So that particular trajectory began while I was still in the partnership. And I think that had something to do perhaps with the ultimate demise of the partnership, the sense that I was discovering things about myself and abilities that I didn't think that I possessed. So that it's all played into it, but I certainly did not expect it to reach a point where I was entirely on my own for the first time at 55. And that is scary, but I'm doing it. I'm trying.
It feels like in this death/rebirth that you've actually been set free. You've been liberated. Does it feel that way?
Yes, absolutely. Truth be told, I think this was a direction I was headed in anyway. But that is not to say that it was not incredibly sad. That that it was that it didn't feel like a divorce or almost a death. To have someone in your corner as part of a duo for a quarter century, and then to suddenly go to nothing and not really have it be your choice, and to have it come entirely out of the blue. Yeah, there is no question that it took me a while to process the hurt that sort of is engendered by that sort of breakup.
But your willingness to share this, because as I said, no one goes through life unscathed. Both Allison and I mean, we have been there for each other. And there are things that happen. And the observation is some people will disappear into themselves and literally go dead inside and just not be able to get up. And others are able to somehow be more resilient than maybe they realize. But sometimes people don't recognize their own resilience unless they see it in someone else. And so the fact that you have your vulnerability, if you will, and your willingness to share in the very thing that looked like it was taken away from you, which was writing, but then actually became your salvation. That's an amazing story.
I love hearing you say that. I should have you give me motivational platitudes every morning when I threaten to not get out of bed. There is no question that it has been hard, that I have turned inward for a lot of it, but I also have adult responsibilities. I have a family of 4 to provide for. I have one kid leaving college and one kid about to start college, and no savings. You know, believe it or not, college doesn't pay for itself, and neither does a home. And and it's not really about the money. Obviously, that matters, and that is a motivator. But everything you described is 100% accurate. It's really just been a test of my own resilience. You know, whether I had it in me to jump off the mat and sort of get back in the ring, to belabor the fight metaphor. But I don't really see any other choice. You know, I am a writer. This is what I do. It has not been my choice to not be on a show this year. It has not been my choice to not sell anything. It's not been my choice to lose a partnership and to lose representation. But the only thing I can control is whether I get up and write in the morning, and whether I continue to follow my muse and follow the path. And, you know, I think I'm better now than I've ever been. You know, like just as a for instance, writing a book has been sort of the great white whale of my life. You know, it's something that, like, I assumed I would die, and on my deathbed they'd be like, "He never wrote a book," you know. And yet, let's see, does that work? Let's put it right here.
You're still here.
I'm still here.
In so many ways.
I'm still standing. I think that was a metaphor for me pulling myself off the mat. It was that I dropped my iPad. I never thought I would write a book. I didn't think it's something that I 100% have wanted to do, and it needn't have I didn't necessarily want it to be a novel, and I didn't necessarily want it to be about what it ended up being about. But I started one novel during this break, and I got like a month in and threw it away, and then I kind of said, wow, this is not going to be in the cards for me. And then someone read one of the sitcom samples that I had written on my own, which happened to be about, again, I realize I'm not being Mr. Fun, but was about my father's suicide and the deleterious ramifications it had on my family of origin in the week that followed. And I had written that as a very, very, very dark comedy. And some people have enjoyed it as a sitcom sample, but have said to me, you know, it feels more like a book. It feels more like a novel. And that's all it took, was one person saying something encouraging. And within 2 months, I had I'd written 140 pages that, if it ever got printed, would probably come up to about 200 pages. So I think that's a novel. It might be a novella. I'm not really sure what a novella is, but it might be that. But I never thought I didn't know that I had it in me, and I certainly didn't think I had it in me this year. But like, once again, and I realize I'm answering my own questions now. I don't know what's going to come of it. I don't know that it will ever be published. I don't know, it's out to book agents, but for me, the mere act of doing it at 55 and conquering my demons and fighting through all the obstacles, both, inward and outward, for me, that's the victory. Yes, I would love it to be out in the world and catapult me to prominence later in life. But the mere fact that I achieved it, like physically achieved it, and had like a stack of paper with my name and my story that I'm able to hold up and say, like, wow, I did it, it is an achievement in and of itself, one that I am able to enjoy. So, which surprises me, because, in our business and in all businesses, people are so focused on, not really these psychic victories, but sort of what have you achieved, commercially, what mercantile success have you brought in? And I'm trying to see success in all its facets.
And you may have actually been set free from that system to now be able to own it rather than it owning you. This is the longest first segment we've ever done.
Oh,
I didn't stop us at our usual time because it just wasn't worth stopping. Actually, we wanted to hear more.
Well, thank you.
But,
or I wouldn't shut up. Those are two ways of looking at it. But
we're gonna end the first segment for this week, and we're going to come back next week. We're going to talk a little bit more about the business, a little bit more about the craft. I know Allison has some questions, as do I. So we're going to sign off for this week with Bryan Behar. I have to say this is one of the more inspirational conversations that we've had. You know, when people, the only way we know, and I say this all the time, but the only way we know who we are by the stories we tell. The only way we know what we're capable of is by the example set by other people and the stories that they tell. And so this is what the Story Hour is all about. Notice we say the stories behind the storytellers themselves. And so this has just been a great episode, and we're going to welcome you back in a week's time, even though we will all, as we say, be wearing the same wardrobe because yeah, that's just the way it is.
Just because.
Because.
But I'm happy to put on my other dark shirt if you want.
Yeah, no, I think we're all looking particularly dapper, and so we'll just leave it at that.
Why screw with success? I hear
exactly. And we're going to welcome everybody back next week. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Allison. We'll see you next week.
Bye. Thank you, guys. Thanks so much.